Welcome to the Public Voice Salon. We're an open dialogue on culture and ideas with a particular focus on education. And today we are going to get an education in comedy, into the magic of comedy. And to do that, we are so honored to have a master practitioner of this art, Mr. Robert Klein, who is one of the great kings of comedy of our time. He emerged in the 1970s, really. He was the first HBO comedian. And from there, he really helped to popularize comedy clubs as a big thing as they are now. He's also been in movies. He's been on television. What hasn't this man done? This introduction could run the entire show, so I'm going to have to cut it short and bring in Mr. Robert Klein. We are so honored, sir, and to have you with us here. On a personal note, I will say this, that in the 70s, I first saw you on HBO. It made me want to be a comedian. I haven't achieved that dream yet. I'm 58, but I'm still trying. But I did become a teacher. So I started out wanting to be a comedian, but became a teacher. Robert, in your biography, you started out as a teacher and became a comedian. So maybe we could just start there. And what were some of your experiences as a teacher? Did that provide a kind of foundation, or was that a precursor into your work in comedy?
I forgot why I'm here. What?
Oh. Well, you're the greatest comedian of our time, and we want to have you on here because our show is...
I can honestly say, in all truthfulness, that I admire the teaching profession at all levels. My sister taught in the New York City system and taught teachers as well at the Board of Education for 33 years. I was a substitute. After the Yale Drama School, 1 year of graduate school, I just had it up to here with education. I love that fact that that has been your focus on these broadcasts, but I wanted to work, you know. I was also pretty young. I went to college when I was 16. And I was, the fall of 63, I'm sitting without work, without school for the first time in my life in my parents' Bronx apartment, and President Kennedy was assassinated. It was a bad fall all around. So in January, in order to get some self-respect and get out of, I had been away from, this basically one-bedroom apartment for 5 years at school. So the one thing I could do after taking a couple of courses at Hunter College in education, I became a substitute teacher. So I did a little bit of teaching, a lot of wrangling, and my earliest comedy bits, basically most of the childhood of the 50s, or a good deal of it, plus my first Tonight Show, which was January 68, was all about that. You know, being awakened in the morning. Good morning, Mr. Klein. You know, I hope I didn't wake you. You know, at 6 in the morning. No, Mr. Charlie, I was reading the Bible. You know. So our German teacher is sick today. Do you know any German? Sauerkraut. Come in. You know. So I wasn't really a teacher, but I'll tell you something.
Yes.
It made me respected. Also, I taught in an all-black school in Mount Vernon. And sometimes I was substituting in the earlier grades, these delicious children, who never had the same last name as their parents. I'd walk some of them in the direction of their homes, and they were, it always reminded me of President Obama. The kid wanted to touch his head. I let them touch my hair, and they were so cool then. And then things, you know, because of poor environment, no backup and all that, how you have to be a superhuman teacher to keep those kids in the loop. I mean, because at that, you know, I'm talking 1964 or something, a lot of their parents did not read to them and so forth and so on. And so, I mean, my sister used to say that we only have them 7 hours a day or something like that. But the idea of teaching something that you know that is worthwhile to someone else has always been appealing to me.
Now, I have a special greeting from Janet Coleman, who wrote this book about the Compass Theater.
I remember Janet very well.
Janet Coleman, and she said she remembers you from Second City in the early days, okay? So I've done some research on the kind of origins of improv. And what's interesting is like an intellectual side to that whole improv thing. It's not just goofy jokes or this or that or Saturday Night Live skits. There was a deep intellectual side. And when you went on the scene there, you were with David Steinberg, and you were both considered the intellectual comics. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, Second City, which began as the Compass, was, pretty much manned and womaned by intellectuals at the University of Chicago. Mike Nichols, Elaine May, who's the big guy from the Mary Tyler Moore Show, Ted, what's his name?
Oh, the guy.
I might have trouble with names or where I am in a sentence. I'm really cool. I have my acuity. I can memorize my lines, Will and Grace, and all that. But anyway, they were all, their original sketches were based on intellectual ideas, and it sort of very quickly metamorphosed into comedy, but always with kind of deep ideas. Like football there hadn't been football at the University of Chicago in years, so they had a sketch, if football came to the University of Chicago, and it was hilarious, these intellectual things going back and forth. I joined it I had seen them on David Susskind. I said, that's my idea of smart show business, because I've been in show business almost 54 years.
Yes.
I have a wonderful pension from 3 unions. It's a wonderful profession, but there are parts of it that are tawdry and stupid. And when I saw these Second City people interviewed and then saw their work, Barbara Harris and Alan Arkin. In fact, I'm going to do, I hope we can pull it off, a reading with Alan Arkin for the Schoolhouse Theater up here in Westchester. We're going to do the Sunshine Boys, Zoom-wise. Anyway, it's true. But the other genius who was totally unintellectual, who passed last year, was my dear friend Fred Willard. And Fred was the thing that kept David and I was laughing. And yeah, David, I think he didn't finish college. I'm not sure. He was smart as a whip. He was also the best improviser I ever saw on that stage. And I'm glad I got to tell him that. We don't see each other too much. We're a couple of old men. He lives mostly on the West Coast. But we loved doing stuff that was of intellectual interest, either in some phony philosophical way or elements of politics, which is what I thought it was all about. And Fred took us away a little from politics. David and I and Judy Grobart, we sort of liked doing that kind of satire.
Wow. Was there a little competition between you and David in the beginning, and then that sort of got resolved? What was that about?
Well, he was the star when I arrived there. In fact, when I arrived there, he was with the company in London, and there was an English group in the theater at the time, a wonderful group. This was after that Beyond the Fringe, just before Monty Python, but English humor, man, I loved it. And when he came, he was the maestro, and he wiped the floor with me. Improvising together, I had a lot to learn. I had great raw talent, but I didn't have technique. And Sheldon Patinkin, who happens to be the cousin of Mandy, he was my director there. The original director was Paul Sills. And fortunately, I got to work with him too. He is the great genius whose mother, Viola Spolin, wrote the book you no doubt noted, called Improvisation for the Theater. And Viola was quite a character, and she hung around there, but I didn't have too much to do with her. Her son had been married to Barbara Harris, and then the marriage was breaking up, and she was having an affair with Alan, and they all still got along. It was crazy. But he didn't communicate the technique well enough to me, and it's a simple technique. If I am improvising with you, John, it is not a question of playwriting. Like, say, I've got an uncle in Dallas, and he smokes cigars and they come out of his nose. And the improvisation lies in your checkered shirt, the style of glasses, your hair, the objects on the wall behind you, things that exist. And if the improviser has a problem, suddenly you can pull a ball or some object out of the imaginary cupboard, and then you go off on another tangent. Sheldon was a wonderful, compassionate director because it was the greatest training, better than the Yale Drama School. Not only that, I got $150 a week. We were the toast of Chicago.
Huh.
The thing is that it was you did the same sketch every night. We did 4 shows a year, so you did the repetitive performances, which is very difficult and underrated, by the way. I've been in 7 Broadway shows, couple of hits that lasted a long time. I was in 2 shows for a year. That was quite enough, doing the same thing every single night, you know.
Mm.
But here, you did your same parts every night for probably 2.5, 3 months till we changed shows. And then you took suggestions from the audience after an intermission, and then you improvised. So I had practice in both. And in introing my fellow cast members David to do his Bible read or whatever, I would practice little stand-up things because I had very much admired, first of all, I had seen, like you saw, live comedy when I was 10 or 11 in the mountains.
Yes.
I never performed there until I was, shall I say, a star. I got big money from the Concord and the Kutchers. You know, that was a steady gig, winter and summer, with a limousine and a big paycheck and everything else. But I saw my first live comedy in the mountains, these funny guys. However, I loved all the comedians on television. And by the time I was thinking of, because my father was very funny, that I could actually become a comedian, I was most impressed by Lenny Bruce and Jonathan Winters, because both of them were one-man show. They did noises, they did imitations, they did Jonathan, who I was fortunate enough to have a friendship with at the end of his life, and some correspondence. He was apolitical, but they weren't just, I'll tell you, my girlfriend's so fat, she hangs around, you know, that's funny, but it isn't, I want it to mean something, you know, maybe use your head a little. I loved slapstick as much as the next guy, and, you know, and I thought those mountain guys were terrific, and they made me laugh. In fact, before this, to get in the mood, what do you think I was just watching? Your Show of Shows, Sid Caesar.
Oh boy, okay.
I haven't laughed out loud in that much in a long time. I've seen them, but most of the sketches in my collection. I mean, just marvelous. You know, this kind of, it's all ethnic rhythms, you know. I mean, I've been asked so often, why are so many Jews why are so many comedians Jewish, you know? Well, Jonathan Winters was not Jewish, and he was very funny, and there are others too. You don't have to be Jewish to be funny, and Fred Willard proved that too. But I do think, without you having asked me, that there is certainly all cultures laugh, but there's a tradition about Jews that even in bad times, you need a good laugh. And you also see other people do it. Why are there so many, black basketball players from the inner city or from rural areas? Because they see it as a role model. So, I don't know, people drift into things. Although my parents saw every Broadway show and they loved to go to movies, never imagined me being in show business.
Wow. You know, one of my heroes also was Steve Allen. And he wrote a book called How to Be Funny. And what he says is, if you want to be funny, he says 2 things, okay? Either be born Jewish or have a funny mother. Something about having a funny mother. Well, you had a funny father.
My mother is funny too, and my sister. Mother was a savant. She played the piano by ear, and she was a real personality ahead of her time. A little, remind me of Rosalind Russell. My father was hilarious. Have you seen the documentary about me that Marshall Fine made?
No.
So, Robert Klein Still Can't Stop His Leg, and it streams on Stars. I think, unfortunately, it was a Harvey Weinstein production, so it got caught in litigation being on Stars. It was at the New York Film Festival, a lot of film festivals, San Francisco Jewish Film Festival, And a lot of these comedians who follow me, some of the biggest comedians participated. And I love what Jay Leno said. He said, when you were a kid and, high school, college, and you want to be a comedian, and your parents, and your parents' friends say, "Is Jay still into that idea of becoming?" He said, "You could point to Robert Klein."
Right.
I went to college. I was a normal guy, and there's a lot of wonderful comments like that. Anyway, I do think that from the Three Stooges, the Ritz Brothers, the whole thing, there are a kind of immigrant rhythms that are straight from Europe. That it's like speaking in what's the name? Klezmer sometimes. Jackie Mason, for example, Rodney Dangerfield, Jacob Cohen, with Jack. He was my Yale Drama School for comedy. He was, when I went to my first Broadway show was Apple Tree. Mike Nichols cast me. How exciting. I didn't have a big part, but I was on Broadway. And after Second City, and I heard about the improv. David told me about the improv, Steinberg, and the only club of its kind, 44th and 9th. So I would, after the show, I went down to there to do stand-up, and Alan Alda, Barbara Harris, the stars of the show, came, the whole cast, to give me moral support. And this guy came up to me and said, "I'll tell you, you're brilliant." Okay? I don't know who he was. I thought, I was ready to call 911. He was hanging in his eye like he was going to kill me. Well, I spent the next 10 years with him, basically, which was quite an experience. I write about it in my book, The Amorous Busboy of Decatur Avenue.
Yes.
Simon & Schuster. Okay. And after that, they wanted me to write a book about just my relationship with him. I was going to say about Steve Allen, at the end, he was just, first of all, I did his show twice. I was so, I practically idolized him. He was a wonderful, wonderful talk show host. And, was talented all around. And I just loved the way in that syndicated show, they make fun. And during the primetime show with Louis Nye and all of them, I was in college. I didn't watch much television. At the end, though, he made a bit of a fool of himself. He seemed so prudish that television was getting dirty and all that. Leave me alone. I mean, I'm the one that opened the gates with HBO. Adult language, when used as part of the language, when apt. I mean, E.L. Doctorow, when he's, can you say cursing on this show?
Well, Claudia might have to bleep it out. But you might have to bleep it, but.
And boop. You know what they did with The Sopranos when it was on A&E in rerun?
Yeah.
Instead of the F word, they actually dubbed the actors "forget it."
Forget about it. Oh,
forget you. Forget your mama. Yeah, you forget me. Forget you. Forget you. And they go, everyone knows, what is it? Alzheimer's is going around the cast. I mean, they know what it is. What I'm saying is, I use it sometimes aptly, but I do not like it every other word. I have no interest in legal government censorship. You do it. But, the English language is a beautiful one. And I was determined not to be embarrassed to use it. If I am in front of an audience, I don't want to go over their heads. I've done shows for 6,000 people outdoors in Six Flags over Georgia with off-duty cops with tattoos and, crew cuts with their little baby girl on their lap. I'm not going to do the F word. You know what I mean? And I wouldn't do it. I just, the point is that elegance is lost, use of the language. And of course, people don't use it anyway. I hear all these sports people, he could have went to the Yankees. He could have gone. And I don't think it's pompous. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful language, hard to sing. You know, I was married to an opera singer. Of all the languages, that's, you do a handle, you know, it's I belong, one syllable you carry in the whole thing. Ask me another question. I'm getting rolling.
I was listening.
Do I look like Benjamin Franklin, or is that an illusion?
A little bit, just a little bit. No,
Getting there. He's pretty good, though. He stooped his way through Paris.
Is that right?
On behalf of his country.
Oh.
It was patriotic stooping, which is a different kind.
Patriotic.
Which reminds me of Gershwin. Patriotic stooping. He got money for the revolution.
Speaking of...
Or become. Hey, were you there at the Capitol? Otherwise, I'm leaving. If you were there at the Capitol. One with the horns?
I was not with the horn.
That Antifa bum with the horns?
I know, that's right. Well, speaking of stooping, we heard some about you and Lenny Bruce's ex-girlfriend. Was that true?
Are you kidding me?
Huh?
Are you kidding me?
No, I was watching one of the videos of you, and you were talking about that you dated Lenny Bruce's ex-girlfriend. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I'm talking out of turn. I'm sorry.
No, because she died.
Oh.
Did this person die? You're talking about?
I don't know, but you dated.
She wrote a book, and she had. I got to California in '67, a year after Lenny died. They shamelessly put the picture of him dead next to his toilet with a needle nearby, which, you know, the man had no champions except that wonderful lawyer. I was his name, but anyway, his first name I've forgotten with you. I've forgotten her name, but she told me that she had a relationship with Lenny, and I believed her. She was an author, so maybe that's what you're talking about. But I just remembered her, and she passed away, I heard, and I can't remember her name. I have a book here somewhere. She used a funny name to write the book, and it was sort of. No, I've stooped them all, though, all the family.
Stooped your way to the top.
I've been in 40 feature films, probably 1,000 television shows, 40 feature films, at least, maybe a couple of more. You know, only a few big parts, but a lot of movies, I have one in the can now that they're trying to, it's an independent film that I did with Arabella. How can I forget her name? She's so wonderful, and she testified at the Harvey's trial. I'm sorry. She has a beautiful Italian name, and she was on The Sopranos, and she's great. And the movie is now called Before I Go, and it's a good movie. I saw it. We did it on the Upper West Side over a year ago now. I play her father, and it hasn't come out yet, which is not unusual. But anyway, I'm still. I did a lot of shows last January, and then it hit. You know, I had to cancel one date in Boca Raton at the Black Box Theater, which was scheduled for April. It's too dangerous to. So basically, I haven't worked in a year, and. I hope it's like riding a bike when things come back. I did get an offer last week, which pleased me, but I couldn't take it because it would have had me going to Toronto the day before my second vaccine, which I now have. The only good thing about being ancient. I got my shots, the gray hair, the thing, born 2842, yes, you know. And anyway, to go to Toronto and be quarantined for 2 weeks and then shoot there for a month, 3 episodes of this new CBS series. I've forgotten the name of it. It's serious, not comic role or some professor or something. I said, no way. I'm not going to be quarantined, even if it wasn't for my shot. But I'm glad somebody thought of me because show business is dormant. I spoke to my friend, Swoosie Kurtz, whose husband I played on the NBC series Sisters, and who's a wonderful talent, multiple Tony winner and everything, Emmy winner. And she's doing a series with this girl, Bialik, called Call Me Kate or something. And they're actually functioning at Warner Brothers, which is the studio I worked at most, by separating each other, all kinds of incredibly difficult things in order to get the work done, including being tested 3 times a day. And they're somehow doing it, But as we sit here, you have these people in Texas and other way, they're just, let's open everything up. They don't get it, It's, that's the most shocking thing about all of this, thinking of education. And it doesn't seem to have done much good. I mean, I have a line somewhere, or I do a thing about the Scopes trial. I said, didn't Spencer Tracy settle this and inherit the wind? We're still arguing, I don't believe I was descended from an ape, Well, to me, not wearing a mask is not only ignorance and stupidity, because they were had to be intubated, and they're saying it's a hoax. People on the table dying. It's a hoax. It's not. They believed it. The propaganda thing was. I didn't think that Trump had Hitler's chops, but I guess I overestimated a certain American mentality and anger. But in any case, it's not only ignorant but very cruel. I saw a poster that someone was holding up. The 0.06% fatalities is not a health crisis. It said, well, thank you. I'm 79, you son of a bitch. Just not caring for fellow man, it's amazingly selfish to me. And I've done a lot of studying of American history. That was my major, history and political science. I've been fascinated by the founding fathers, who were far from perfect. There should be an Adams memorial more than a Jefferson memorial. But the point is that these were high quality people who risked a lot, even though they were a lot of slaveholders and all the rest. And the idea that all these statues and this Confederate nostalgia is really from the late 19th century into the 1910s, 20s, 30s. Woodrow Wilson, I thought he was a great guy. He was a racist. And I read this John Dos Passos book called Wilson's War. He's an idiot to get us into this. We were making a ton of money off it. There wasn't any threat to us. Anyway, wow. So I think that one of the worst things about American society is that nobody has the slightest idea of civics. They have no idea how their government works. They have no idea how delicate democracy is, how rare it is. I've been using the word experiment for years, and I hear it a lot. It's very apt. I mean, who says we can preserve this? And what was so great about Civil War, the Southern, was that they should be statues of them and paintings in the White House when they were treasonous. The Civil War was nothing but treason, and the one reason for it was slavery, and everything else is revisionism. And it exists today. The blacks get too much. Unless you have people poor of all colors catch up and get their fair share, we're not fulfilling the promise. The Voting Rights Act is a pivotal thing, and it was also decimated. So, other than that, I think things are great. Get the wrong impression, but I have booked a bungalow in New Zealand, and I'm going there if they need me.
Good for you. Good for you. I just want you to know, sir, I was taking notes here while you were talking, because we started out this program with this idea of getting an education in comedy, but we're also getting an education in history, we're getting an education in political science, and somehow this is all interconnected, because here's another book I just read recently about humor by Terry Eagleton. It's called Humor, by one of the great literary critics of our time, and he makes the case that humor has a lot to do with the health of a democracy. You know, and I'm sure this has been said before, that humor, it punctuates the pompous and the proud. It keeps everybody down to earth. And there's a lot of research into that that's very interesting. And and you kind of represent that, having one foot in the intellectual world, coming out of Alfred, you know, studying history, studying politics, and one foot also wanting to connect with everyday people. You know, you want to connect, you don't want to lose your audience. And somehow you were able to synthesize that. And I think that's fascinating how you did that. And I'd be...
Well, my second album, Mind Over Matter.
Yeah.
A portion about Watergate. And a lot of these guys, like Bill Maher, said he actually copied it down to see what it looked like on the printed page in that movie about me. That, you know, got a lot of attention from other comedians about, you know, perking up about politics. I'll tell you, I did a few, I played with Blythe Danner. She was my wife in the Will and Grace. We did a few episodes. And Alec Baldwin was in one of them. And I said to him, the stuff you're doing on Saturday Night Live, this was like a year and a half ago. If you did it in China or Russia or Iran or so, you'd be in jail or dead. And I said, that's, you know, I feel that the 4-year decline of the American government brought out absolutely spectacular journalism and wonderful satire. And both are needed for a healthy, you know, the right wing, they have a comedy show with this yokel I hate. I can't watch Fox for more than a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
I was on with Hannity 15, 20 years ago, and I needled him a little. He wasn't like quite as vicious and as powerful, I might add. But, you know, I was at some party. I had a friend who was worked at Fox News. She had a Christmas party, and I'm sitting there about 10 years ago. And this guy is an anchorman. I think he's still on. He may be one of those morning guys that the president used to call. And we were talking about drilling for gas. What do they call it?
Fracking.
Fracking.
Yeah.
And I said, you know, people have green water coming. Oh, that's been proved false. You know, they have their own information sources. Like that didn't happen to anyone. You know, there's been terrible consequences. Everything has a consequence. You know, John Adams, I thought was perfect after reading whose book about him, I forgot. And this wonderful historian, Fred Kaplan, told me that, don't you understand? He said, these guys all fall in love with their subject. You know, like Joseph Ellis in 1999, 2000, was still refusing to acknowledge that Thomas Jefferson had sired an entire family of slaves, you know, not to mention that his mate, one of their last names, I forgot, he took her to Paris. She was sired by his father-in-law. So his wife died, and there was a tan, beautiful imitation of his wife. I mean, the whole thing is perverse. But even Adams had the alien sedition laws. He thought nobody could say a bad word about him in the papers. You know, he got powerful. Andrew Cuomo, I thought he was terrific. And but he's a bully. I knew his father was much more fun, but I knew that Mario, who was one of a kind, I knew he could never be president. Too cranky.
Okay.
Didn't have the patience with people. And this guy, you know, too cranky. Now, Trump is another story. He said what was on a lot of people's minds, which is frightening in itself. And they bought into that great, you know, it's funny, 14 years, I never saw that show. I never saw that show. And I mean, 2 minutes, I saw Joan Rivers' daughter cursing, you know, and it looked like, you know, the guy in the afternoon where the women fight each other, you know. What's his name? Mayor of the Jewish boy from Queens who was mayor of Cincinnati. Jerry Springer.
Springer, right, Jerry Springer.
You know he was mayor of Cincinnati?
That I did not know.
Paid a hooker with a check.
Okay.
Smart for a politician, wasn't it? And I think it bounced too, or maybe no. He actually went to the House of Ill Repute, and he, you know, he said he had a coupon from Screw magazine, you know.
Oh,
but I had the Around the World. It's $5. I had the regular. That's an extra $7.50. And is it before 5? I have the early bird special.
Oh, gee. Wow, we got to get you on to CNN and MSNBC. You should be a regular, Robert. I mean, come.
You know what? I'd love to go on MSNBC. I bumped
Yeah.
into Ari Melber at the Writers Awards a couple of years ago. I feel like I don't want to, I suppose I could try to email him because he likes to have comedians on. But I'll tell you the truth, it's been painful.
Mm.
The election day and the inauguration were glorious.
Mm.
But I'm to think that so much of the public is so ignorant and hateful. I find it difficult I read the Times fervently every morning, but not quite as thoroughly now. And even MSNBC, I'd rather watch 48 Hours and see them catch a murderer who could say, "I want a lawyer, and I want to talk to you," and the show is over. It's based entirely on poor, ignorant, poor people who said, "Yeah, I'll tell you everything." Yeah, it was self-defense. I cut her throat 3 times, and I cut off her legs. It was completely self-defense. Anyway, I'll do anything to escape. Sid Caesar.
Yes.
I love W.C. Fields, the Marx Brothers. Do you know I had a wonderful, unfortunately brief correspondence and a visit, which wasn't so brief, with Groucho.
Oh, really? Do tell. Do tell.
Julius Marx.
Wow.
It was my first Tonight Show host. I get a letter from Groucho Marx.
Okay.
And he said, "You are wonderful, and you saved that girl who was going off on cockroaches, whatever." And he said, "I laughed so hard I almost fell off my secretary's knee." So he said, "Next time you come out to LA, call me and I'll give you dinner. And if I really like you, I'll give you breakfast too."
Oh.
So the next gig I had out there wasn't too long after. He'd also seen a thing about me in the Sunday Arts and Leisure. And I was doing Love American Style. Remember that show?
Of course, yes. Love American Style. Yeah.
Right. And I went out in Paramount. It turns out we're going to do most of the shooting at night. So I called Groucho. I got there and I said, "Robert Klein, you remember?" I remember. All the old actors. George Burns, I'd always say my name, and they almost seemed offended, but I thought it would be polite. So he said, I remember. Can you come to dinner? I said, "Groucho, we're shooting at night." He said, "Well, can you come to dinner?" I said, "Well, Groucho, we're shooting at night." He said, "Can you come to dinner?" I said, "Well, you said you really like me. Give me breakfast." He said, "Come to breakfast." So I went to his house in Beverly Hills the next morning and spent 3 hours with him. And wonderful.
He was a great ad-libber. He was one of the great, you serve up a straight line, boom, he'll hit it right out, right? Was he that good in person? Was he funny in person, Groucho?
Well, there was a nurse there without uniform, a beautiful woman. He was fine. He had a hospital bed, but he had some mini strokes. He was he was like you saw him on Cabot in those final appearances. He was not, You Bet Your Life, which was perfect for him.
Yeah.
That was perfect. Yeah. He was, I have a feeling he was slightly misogynist. He had bad marriages and they were alcoholics, but I don't know. He must have been tough married to him. To me, it was like, he's the best. I love the Marx Brothers, and I think Groucho is my favorite. Also, I have the entire collection of You Bet Your Life. We watched it. My father bought it to Soto because of that, 1956. W.C. Fields, I'm in correspondence with his granddaughter and grandson. They're both grandparents. He was, shall we say, an imperfect individual, but post-college, I picked on him for my friends. I think my father never related to him. I think probably because W.C. didn't like Roosevelt. Anyone that didn't like Roosevelt, my father didn't like. He'd see Adolph Manjou on the screen. "That anti-Roosevelt bastard, I hate him." So everything was going to that. Laurel and Hardy, Unfortunately, Stan Laurel, who was very accessible out there at the beach,
Oh,
he loved young comedy people coming to see him. I missed out. He died before. But I love them. And there's a wonderful movie that came out last year about them called Stan and Ollie, which is just exceptional, about them near the end of their careers. And then there's Charlie Chaplin. I have a big cutout of him when you come in my door.
okay.
Phil Silvers, the Sergeant Bilko, and the Honeymooners, Jackie Gleason, are two of my all-time favorite series. I have the entire collection. I go to them again. You can go back to comedy. And I've seen all the Marx Brothers films no less than 15 or 20 times in my life. And when you can do that and go back and it makes you laugh again, like I found myself laughing out loud with Sid Caesar. That's a tremendous gift, and I come to the somewhat, well, it's not pretentious. I think it's heartfelt to say that it's a high calling being a comedian because, whatever disappointment you had with your spouse or your health or your children or whatever, for that 35 minutes, when that Cadillac would drop off that comedian at the bungalow colony or the small hotel that my father could afford to send us to a week, everybody in that audience felt their stomachs hurt. And he left after 35, I don't know what he got then, a couple of hundred maybe, and goes into his Cadillac. I said, boy, that's a nice thing. You spread mirth. You make people feel better than they felt before. And there is, of course, anecdotal evidence that comedy is curative and palliative. Who was that editor? I've forgotten his name, who was close to death from
Norman Cousins.
You've got it, Norman Cousins. I always have trouble remembering his name. Cousin Myrna, Cousin Sheila, Norman Cousins. He had a life-threatening arthritis, and he began to show Marx Brothers to himself, Laurel and Hardy, and he claims that the important thing is that it made him feel better one way or the other. I wouldn't. My father. I'm glad that Marshall Fine, former head of the New York Film Critics, who is retiring now, but who actually did this film about me, he found the footage of my father and me on the Today Show, being interviewed by Gene Shalit. At the time, I was on Broadway, and they're playing our song with Lucy Arnaz. I was nominated for a Tony.
Yes.
It was great, except to do that 8 shows a week for a year, I went nuts physically and mentally. I used to lose, 4 or 5 pounds on a summer night dancing. Anyway, my father came down with me to the studio. While I was there, Gene Shalit said, "Hey, Mr. Klein, would you mind if we interview you too? I did Lucille Ball and Lucy last week." He says, "Well, did I shave?" Whatever. So Gene Shalit says to him, "I understand that he wanted to be a doctor." And my father said, "Yeah." And I figured by the time he becomes one, I'll be old enough to need them. And now, when I get sick, he gives me 2 tickets to a show. And Shalit was falling off the chair. And my father he was a textile salesman in the garment center, 2% commission. He hated it. He was a good mathematician. He was a Stuyvesant graduate, went to CCNY a semester or 2, and decided he wanted to dress up and be, the women's clothing, not him dressed in women, dress business. And that was it. And he regretted it after that. So it was always drilled into me, education, and I am educated. But even now, I can't stop learning. I have read close to 33 books in the past 9 months.
Ooh.
And a lot of them online, on my iPad, they're bargains, $1.99 and $2.99. I mean, the complete Winston Churchill thing by really good historians. I just finished a book about all of the bureaucrats under Truman who ran the war, under Roosevelt, and about the 4 important admirals. a wonderful book by my friend Jonathan Alter, who you may see on MSNBC.
Yes, exactly.
A new book about Jimmy Carter, which
Okay.
is long but well worth it. Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, yeah, just you talk about your family. My grandmother grew up in the Bronx. She went to Walton High.
It was the sister school of my school, DeWitt Clinton.
Okay. Now, when you go to DeWitt Clinton and you look and see in Wikipedia the list of notable graduates from DeWitt Clinton, it's like these people ran the world. I mean, it's like an incredible Hollywood, sports, journalism.
James Baldwin, Burt Lancaster, Neil Simon, Patty Chayefsky, Robert Klein, Judd Hirsch.
Right.
A lot. It was all boys. Now it's co-ed. And there's also, I'm in a documentary. They're still showing it on HBO. Boy, there's a documentary I did that you really love. It's called When Comedy Went to School.
Ooh.
And it is, can you see this?
Okay, yes.
And it's about comedy and the Borscht Belt. It was beautifully produced.
Okay.
And I am the narrator.
Oh, wonderful.
And you can look it up online. They love it to be shown in places. But this other documentary that I did a year and a half ago that they're still showing on HBO is, I guess it's called The Bronx.
Oh.
And George Shapiro is Seinfeld's manager, and he's a sweet old guy. And he went to Clinton, and he never forgot it. So he and his buddies, they did a documentary. They also did another one called "If You're Not in the Obit, Have Breakfast" with Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks. But anyway, I sing in my old neighborhood, a big musical number. It was such a kick. Ooh. And these old, mostly Jewish men now, who are graduates, all of them did well. They're in their 80s. And they're still friends. They keep in touch. Some of them live in California. And they sponsored these 10 children of color, girls and boys. Clinton is now co-ed. And followed them through. And it's a wonderful sort of a dual story about these old men being nostalgic and about where DeWitt Clinton is now with children of color. And these are exemplary children who have to take care of 5 baby sisters, and their parents have no money and all the rest. So DeWitt Clinton, I did scenes for one of my HBO specials, doo-wop singing in the boys' room at DeWitt Clinton. And in the summer of 15 years ago or more, 20 years ago, and they were removing urinals. That tells you that they were going co-ed. They were making girls' bathrooms. All boys school. Walton was all girls, and Clinton was all boys. Maybe I took your mother out. Maybe I dated your mother.
Grandmother, no. Actually, my grandmother, she just turned 100.
A little old for me.
Now,
I'm only 79.
My grandparents live in, my grandfather died, but my grandmother still lives in Fort Lee, New Jersey. And they would go to this local coffee shop in Fort Lee. And for some reason, there were like comedians who would actually come into this club. A guy named Dick Capri would come into the coffee shop.
Dick, very well.
Sit there and chat. Charlie Callis came by one day, okay? And there was a guy named Mickey Marvin who actually became very friendly with my grandparents, and he would come to our family parties, and Mickey Marvin would go up to the Borscht Belt. He was one of those he was very friendly with Corbett Monica. And so anyway, Mickey one day, he said, "Hey, John, you want to come with me up to the bungalows?" I said, "Sure." On a Saturday night, we went up there, and I was like a kid in a candy store. It was amazing to have experienced at least some of that culture, which also, like you said, shaped your own style in some way. But
Mickey Marvin, I remember the name. And I know Dick Capri, and I know Charlie died, I think.
He did, yeah.
He did all those funny faces and noises. Dick Capri is the youngest 85 I've ever seen. I saw him in Florida a year ago when I was performing there. He's amazing. He still actually does his turn. Stewie Stone is another one. And they've been doing it for forever. But there was a thing about the Borscht Belt that there was a lot of joke stealing, And by the time I started, Rodney and I wrote our own material. And it was not the usual thing when I started. Usually I writers and all that. And I have more difficulty protecting my material in this day and age than Charles Dickens had protecting it in 1850. I mean, stand up, you hear your own jokes. In fact, in this documentary, Comedy Went to School, Grossinger's grandniece or whatever, she said she used to tell the comedians coming in what jokes the ones did before so they won't repeat it. That may sound cute, but Rodney used to say, it's like taking your kids. You write the stuff, you don't want people stealing it. So anyway, original ideas, original thinking. There isn't a day go by that Rodney, that one of his jokes, I don't think of something about when we hung out together and some of the brilliant jokes. I very much disapproved of. I mean, he was subject to bad parenting. His father deserted. I saw them in a rapprochement on the beach at Miami Beach. He was an old man. He had throat cancer, and Jack was starting to make noise. He said, "Keep up that no respect thing. It's good." But where was he when the kid lived with his mother in Forest Hills? The father was in Manhattan. Anyway, and his mother, he said, was impossible. And his nephew told me his mother was impossible. And he had 2 kids, and I still keep in touch with his daughter. She's a wonderful woman.
Wow.
She's an interior designer, Melanie. But he allowed this, he remarried 15 years before he died, and she took most of the money and all. And then she kept him away from his friends. Right at the funeral, I said to her, I wrote him a letter, Joan, what happened? Rodney, he gets angry. Angry at what? She was a manipulator. And but his red tie is in the Smithsonian. He started late. He went against all odds. And he was an amazing comedian, and he loved he didn't love it. He was always depressed, but he made a tremendous success. And I thought his earlier jokes were clever. They were social. Like for example, he said, I'll tell you, I played a lot of tough clubs, Aldo's, formerly Vinny's, formerly Nunzio's. I'll tell you, this Nunzio's was a tough club. When you went Nunzio's, you went down 3 steps, physically and socially. I mean, that's a sophisticated joke. I mean, our parks are unsafe, our schools are unsafe, our streets are unsafe. But under our arms, we have complete protection. These were beautiful. Later on, he had, very blue or dirty. But I was even angry at him at his funeral. There was I, one side with Stella and Mira from in this tent in the cemetery in Hollywood. Stella and Mira and me and Melanie and Brian, his children. And on the other side was every major comedy star in the world, in California. And, I was the first that he made, that we mentored. But he went on to give good advice to a lot of comedians. They never forgot it. He loved hanging around with the guys.
Wow.
Well, we all have our problems, and he doesn't have any anymore. But he was, as comedians go, he was truly, truly funny. Not synthetic. Corbett Monica, not as funny. No. Charlie Callis could be very funny.
Right.
And there are guys, the one Norm Crosby, he died recently. You couldn't hear, remember? The malaprops. To me, that wasn't funny. Jackie Mason, shall we say, an imperfect human being.
Yes.
This guy is funny. I mean, he's nuts, but he's funny. I haven't seen him in a long time, and I suspect, I don't know, he must be 190. But another one, it's, I don't know, in person, Richard Pryor was wonderful. He was released. I met him years ago at the Improv. He was collegiate. He used to be on Merv Griffin with white sweaters, and he was adorable. And he disappeared around 68, a year of tremendous violence and ferment, assassinations, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy. He kind of dropped from the scene for about a year, and he came back a much more authentic comedian. Now because when I met him at the Improv, he was already been on television. He gave me advice and everything, and I was working out there. And I said, "What college did you go to?" And he almost fell off the chair laughing. You know, he was brought up in a brothel in Peoria, Illinois. His grandmother ran a brothel.
Whoa.
So he came back, and it's not just that he was allowed to curse and all that. He just let loose with, you know, because he was really sweet, but he had a kind of uncontrolled violent streak too. It got him into trouble. And of course, the drugs really overtook him. And George Carlin, too, was really wonderful. He made a tremendous impression. I keep in touch with his daughter, Kelly. I'm like an uncle. I'm still alive, at least, of this trio. And, you know, he got dark at the end, really dark, suicide, talking about cruel things. But he has a body of work that's amazing. And, you know, these guys, they're good. You know, Robin was... well, if there were no Jonathan Winters, it wouldn't have been Robin. He certainly, and Jonathan knew this, and they were close friends, but he was an amazing talent. He was an amazing talent, a quick mind, and a really sweet guy, you know.
I ordered my copy of the Amorous Busboy from Decatur Avenue today. I'll be looking out for that to come from Amazon. I'm going to watch that documentary that you did, the one about you, about the Can't Stop My Leg, and I would love to keep this conversation going, Robert. It's really been very enriching.
Do you have stars in your cable TV?
We'll look and see. We'll look and see.
Somewhere, I think it's streaming on Stars. You have to have one of those smart things, whatever. Okay. And you'd really like when comedy went to school about the Borscht Belt. And so let me wish you a good night.
I'm going to appoint you as my mentor, my teacher, because I have not given up the dream of getting into comedy. Even at the age of 58, I'm not giving up that dream to somehow combine the teaching with the comedy or... and some, yeah.
Don't give up on your dream. Just don't do it.
This is the woman over here, my wife Claudia, who makes all my dreams come true. Without her, we wouldn't have a show. Love is the answer as well. So, Robert, we wish you a loving future, and we certainly hope that we will continue this conversation.
Very cool.
Thank you so much, my friend.
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Be well.
Bye-bye.
Okay.